Hi, yeah, my name is Reid Duke. I'm a longtime professional Magic player. I'm a member of the Magic Hall of Fame, and these days I work with Channel Fireball and TCG Player to produce Magic content, kind of teach the next generation of players. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite Magic cards of all time. Treetop Village is one of the early examples of a creature land. So it enters the battlefield tapped, it makes green mana, but you can pay 2 mana to make it into a 3/3 trample creature. And what I love about this card is that it's so good, but the value is kind of subtle and hidden. So when you think about a way a Magic game plays out in your head, you think, okay, well, everyone's playing creatures every single turn, they're using all their mana, it's never going to come up that I'm going to want to make this a creature. But then in practice, games play out much differently than that when you have an awkward draw or you don't have something to cast on a certain turn, and it's just so great to be able to look down and find this hidden value in your mana base that you can use to help you win a close game. Treetop Village doesn't see a lot of tournament play anymore, but even as recently as I think it was a Pro Tour back in 2018, I played with Treetop Village in Modern. And I remember one distinct game against a control player who they had a bunch of sorcery speed removal stuff like Supreme Verdict, Wrath of God, and I basically just all I did every turn was activate Treetop Village and attack. And because it was never a creature to be vulnerable, during my opponent's turn, it was never vulnerable to their sorcery speed removal. They never had the right answer, and I almost won the game single-handedly with it. Of course, that ended in victory. Treetop Village is originally from Urza's Legacy. Somebody would have to fact-check the year on that, but something back in like the 1998, 1999 era. I would say I discovered Treetop Village a little bit later, because I was very young back, when it was first printed, but playing it in the early days of Modern, or even there's an old format called Extended that was like kind of the predecessor of Modern. I had a lot of really great experiences, and just to put it very simply, I would often build decks without Treetop Village and I would lose, and then I would add Treetop Village and I would notice myself winning a lot more. And that was kind of a big breakthrough moment for me in terms of my deck building and my ability to evaluate the hidden power level in cards. The more competitive you get in Magic, the more you have to find these small details. Think about some giant dragon creature, like everyone can read that and know that if it's on the battlefield, it's going to help determine the outcome of a game. But understanding the difference between when should I put a forest in my deck versus when should I put a Treetop Village in my deck versus a dual land or something else, that's very subtle and difficult, but it can still make a big difference, and that could be the edge you need to do well in a tournament. Noble Hierarch is a mana creature, so it costs 1 green to cast. It's a 0/1, and it taps for either green, white, or blue mana. But importantly, it has Exalted, which that's an ability that boosts your other creatures when they attack alone. So for example, imagine you play Noble Hierarch on turn 1. Then you can play a 3 mana creature ahead of schedule on the second turn, and when it starts attacking, it's oversized, so it's difficult for the opponent to block. It outputs damage at an increased rate. So one thing you're going to notice about a lot of my favorite cards is there's this subtle value. It's all about running on thin margins and gathering small advantages as the game goes on. And that Exalted ability really doesn't seem like much when you read it on paper, but my experience is that it's huge. So Noble Hierarch is a big upgrade over similar cards like Birds of Paradise and Llanowar Elves, which I like those cards a lot. I really love the pattern of getting to play a bigger, more expensive creature, quicker than my opponent's able to. But Noble Hierarch in particular, with that Exalted ability, has been so good for me over the course of the years. So if you have multiple Noble Hierarchs, then suddenly your small 0/1 flying Birds of Paradise could be attacking for 3 damage in the air, and your opponent, if they think you have a bunch of unassuming, harmless creatures, but then that turns out to not be the case. The funny thing about Noble Hierarch is it makes white, green, and blue mana, but I like this card so much that I I've played it in decks that don't even match that color combination. So I've played it in like Sultai, green, blue, and black a lot, because that's one of my favorite color combinations. But recently, I was very excited because they printed Ignoble Hierarch, which is in green, red, and black, and that's Jund. That's actually my favorite color combination. So I got to sort of port one of my favorite cards and upgrade it so that it's now even better in the decks I like to play it in. Somebody might have thought of me and been like, oh, Reid's really gonna like this card. Maybe one of the reasons I have such fond memories of Noble Hierarch is this is one of the cards that I used when I was first starting to have success on the tournament scene. So this was maybe around 2009, 2010. And I had not yet broken through to be able to qualify for the Pro Tour, but I was trying. So every weekend I was out there going to play qualifier tournaments or playing on Magic Online to try to qualify for the Pro Tour. And I was using Noble Hierarch in pretty much any format that I could, whether that was standard or extended or modern. I sort of found my lane. I found what worked for me, and that was how I originally broke through onto the Pro Tour. Yeah, Noble Hierarch has it a little bit tough in modern right now because it has 1 toughness, and there are a lot of really, really good cards that deal 1 damage, like Orcish Bowmasters and Wrenn and 6. But I still try my hardest. I try to break out the Noble Hierarchs and the Ignoble Hierarchs every once in a while. You know, Magic is the best game in the world because you can make of it what you want it to be. So you can opt into the stuff that's fun for you. And a lot of times that's tapping into the nostalgia and the collection. And I've owned these cards for a long time, so I want to play with them. Or I love this card, so I want to go out and, you know, find a way to buy it and add it to my collection. And that's awesome. And, you know, even as a competitive player, I'm not immune to those feelings. And I still want to, you know, be able to break out my favorite cards and play with them in tournaments when I can. Green Sun Zenith is a sorcery, and this is what I call a scalable spell. So the mana cost is green and X, which means you can spend any amount of mana on it. And based on the amount of mana that you spend, you get to search your library for a green creature with that mana value and put it onto the battlefield. So you may start to notice a trend in my favorite cards that a lot of them are green, and they apply to these mid-range creature decks. And Green Sun Zenith is a perfect one for this style of deck because you can use it early in the game to get ahead on mana. So for example, you know, you spend 2 mana and you go search out your Noble Hierarch. Or once you have a lot of mana, you can use it as a win condition or a payoff spell later on. One pattern that I'll mention that's super, super important for Green Sun Zenith is finding the card Dryad Arbor. Now, Dryad Arbor is a land that counts as a creature. So its mana value is 0. So you can just tap 1 forest on the first turn of the game and Green Sun Zenith and find Dryad Arbor. So in this way, you can kind of think of it as a split card of either this is a mana dork, if that's what you need a play to have on the first turn, or it's a win condition later in the game. So when you look at your opening hand, whatever role you need Green Sun Zenith to play, it can do it. So in that way, it increases the consistency of your deck and your strategy. And I really value consistency in a strategy. So I don't like having a bad draw. And I think those watching at home can relate to that. Nobody likes to be mana screwed. Nobody likes to have 100 lands and nothing to do with them. So when I build my decks, that's something that I think about, and I try to build consistency into my strategy. And one way that you can do that is having cards that scale based on the stage of the game that you're in, or cards that you can spend a variable amount of mana on. So Green Sun Zenith is a perfect example. Treetop Village is a perfect example where, you know, when things are going well and you have something to cast, you never have to worry about your Treetop Village. But it's when you have an awkward draw or when you're missing a play for a turn that you're really happy to have it. Green Sun Zenith has been banned for a long time. Some people speculate that maybe it's of a power level where it could be unbanned someday. But I think the number one reason why Green Sun Zenith is banned in Modern is that pattern with Dryad Arbor, where you get to, because Dryad Arbor is legal in Modern, you could use the Green Sun Zenith at any mana value, including on turn 1. Whereas I think the design of the card is that you're supposed to have to spend a little bit more mana to make it useful. Green Sun Zenith being banned just gives me something to hope for. You know, every morning I wake up and I'm like, could this be the day that Green Sun Zenith is unbanned and I get to play with it again? Liliana of the Veil, if I had to choose my all-time favorite Magic card, it would be Liliana. Now, she is a Planeswalker, and she's an early example of a Planeswalker costing only 3 mana. At the time, most Planeswalkers were 4 and 5, like kind of more powerful top-end cards. But Liliana comes down early for 2 black and 1 colorless, and she can make your opponent sacrifice a creature for -2 of her starting 3 loyalty. She can +1 to make both players discard a card, and then she has a really powerful, game-changing ultimate ability for -6. Now, the interesting thing about Liliana is her main ability, the +1 to make both players discard, that's a symmetrical effect. So you look at that and you're like, well, it's impacting both players equally, so how can I use this to my advantage? And that's where the fun comes in, is you need to look for ways to break the synergy. So one way to do that is you can just empty your hand really quickly, so that when you use the +1 ability, you have no cards to discard, but your opponent still has to discard. You can also look for cards that are useful to have in your graveyard, or that you don't mind discarding for one reason or another. Or you can just use sort of a resource denial strategy where it's to your advantage to kind of pare down resources and play a leaner, more efficient game. And that's what I really like to do. So one example of a deck that Liliana has historically been great in is modern Jund or modern Golgari, where you kind of just want to deplete your opponent's resources and have the last really powerful threat standing, like, well, Liliana herself, or like Tarmogoyf, that can be a giant creature, or a creature land like Treetop Village. So it just plays really nicely in the type of strategy that I love. The most powerful Liliana has ever been was in the era of Modern, when Deathrite Shaman was legal. Another one of my favorite cards. Didn't quite make the list for today, but Deathrite Shaman is another example of a creature that you can play on turn 1 and generate extra mana. So you have 3 mana on turn 2. So you go Deathrite Shaman, turn 2 Liliana. You start plussing to work on your opponent's hand and force them to operate on a smaller number of resources. You can threaten to get up to that 6 loyalty ultimate really quickly, or you can just use the rest of your deck as supporting cast of characters to leverage the advantage that Liliana is giving you. You know, destroys the opponent's defenses, and then whatever your win condition is able to slip through the cracks and win you the game. Oh boy, you're making me choose between green and black as which is my favorite color. I think if I had to play a monocolor strategy, I would go for black. And that's because I really like the play pattern of sort of managing your opponent's resources and putting them in tough binds. And Liliana is the perfect incarnation of everything that black can do. And I think that's probably the reason that it was such a slam dunk card, and a card that I personally love, is it's so kind of flavorful of the feel of the color black strategically, and the feel flavor wise of like black magic and witchcraft, and just doing all these bad things to your opponent. Yeah, I'm a nice guy. I'm a nice opponent to play against across the table, but I really love to choose cards that make your life miserable. So I'm ruthless in that way. I love the deck building puzzle in Magic. So once again, certain cards are just, you read them and they're obvious how powerful they are. Oh, okay, this is a 10/10 creature. Everyone knows what that does. But when you have a card like Liliana, where it's clearly quite powerful, but it takes a little bit of strategizing in order to generate the maximum value from it. That's fun for me, because both in the deck building element of Magic and the gameplay element of Magic, you have to be subtle and strategic in order to make Liliana work for you. Huntmaster of the Fells. So I actually have Huntmaster of the Fells over my shoulder here, but this is a double-faced werewolf card. So it's 4 mana, red and green and 2, for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and you make a 2/2 wolf. So right there up front, this is an ideal card for stabilizing a bad situation. Imagine a red aggro deck or a white aggro deck is beating you down. You're on the back foot. You're like, oh man, I really need some help here. Well, the Huntmaster of the Fells comes down. It generates 2 blockers. It buffers your life total, and it gives you a really high chance that you'll get to survive till the next turn and make another powerful play and then take over the game. So kind of a perfect way to stabilize the situation and bridge the gap to your larger spells. Now, if Huntmaster sticks around, it can transform into Ravager of the Fells, which is a 4/4 trample, and whenever it transforms into Ravager of the Fells, you deal 2 damage to the opponent and 2 damage to one of their creatures. So in sort of a board stall situation, you can use strategy of transforming the Huntmaster between its werewolf form and its human form to give you an advantage, attack the opponent's life total, kill off their small creatures. And so Huntmaster makes for this really nice intersection of immediate impact on the board, but also that's something that can be really powerful and fun to use if the game drags on and goes long. So one of my favorite decks of all time was an old standard version of Jund, which actually was quite different from the modern version. But in standard, you had Huntmaster of the Fells, you had Thragtusk, you had Bonfire of the Damned, just to name a few cards. So Huntmaster and Thragtusk were great for creatures that come down, gain you life, stabilize the situation, create this board stall where the opponent can't make profitable attacks. And then Bonfire of the Damned was a super powerful X spell where you could deal X damage to your opponent and all of their creatures. So you could kind of create this situation where they're stuck, they can't make any attacks, and they're just waiting until that nightmare moment when you have the bonfire and can wipe the board and start attacking yourself. That was a really fun deck for me, and Huntmaster of the Fells was one of the driving forces behind that. Huntmaster of the Fells is a card where it's not always obvious everything that it's going to do when it hits the battlefield. So if you are really experienced with the patterns and the potential of Huntmaster of the Fells, and your opponent is maybe not, maybe they haven't played against it enough times, or they don't have a picture in their head of what's going to happen over the course of a few turns, a few transformations, that can give you a big advantage and allow you to take the game in the direction you want it to go. Oh boy, one card that I really dislike right now. That's a great question. Well, I guess since I've been playing a lot of Modern and Legacy right now, the new card Up the Beanstalk is like super prevalent. And it's really annoying because if I want to play with Liliana and Thoughtseize and I want to pare down my opponent's resources, but when Up the Beanstalk comes down, it means that the opponent's basically going to have a full hand for the entire game, so you almost can't employ that strategy. Up the Beanstalk is a fun card in its own way, and it's usually just if something becomes too ubiquitous, where you play against it over and over and over again, that the joy starts to come out of it. So we'll see what comes about with Up the Beanstalk, whether it's just merely one of the good strategies in Modern and Legacy, or whether everyone starts playing with it and then it won't be as fun anymore. I had an awesome time talking about my favorite cards with you, walking down memory lane, and this touches on so many of the joys of Magic, both the nostalgia and the collecting aspect, and the strategy deck building aspect. And that's what my work is with TCG Player and Channel Fireball now, is sort of being able to share the joy and enthusiasm of Magic with people. So obviously we have plenty of resources for those who are into collecting, but my work in particular is about Magic content, and in particular strategy content. So if you want to learn about deck building, if you want to just hone your craft and take your game to the next level, that's what I'm working on every single day over at Channel Fireball and TCG Player Infinite. So check out those articles. Thanks so much for listening. Once again, I'm Reid Duke. If you want to hear more from me or read my content, you can go to channelfireball.com or infinite.tcgplayer.com, and be sure to check out the Foundation series for new players.